it's not even coincidental, but I listened to David Makovsky yesterday, and talking about a lot about with Israel and with doing the this tonight. It should really can't wait to hear it.
Why do I know that name? Why do I know that name?
Oh, Guam's here. Welcome everyone to the last of our April University series taught by all the rabbis here. So all the Tuesdays in April have been a holiday of some sort. And today is this confluence of Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. And these, along with Yom HaShoah, really constitute what I think we can think of as the Israeli High Holy Days, or really sort of the most modern of the Jewish liturgical calendar. And actually there's all sorts of fights, tribal fights, about whether or not these are part of the liturgical calendar or not. Some of the dividing line between religious Zionist, Dati Lomi, sometimes thought of as modern Orthodox, a little different, and ultra-Orthodox, where the ultra-Orthodox would not count these as holidays and the religious Zionists absolutely would. So what I want to do is use this day, this confluence, and really sort of all three of these as an opportunity to talk about the meaning of Israel to American Jewry today, and what is this relationship. And I really would like to, as much as we can, stick within the realms of either the descriptive or the aspirational. And as much as we can, avoid prescriptive language, right? Because I think that's one of the failings of a lot of Israel dialogue, is we get really into prescriptive language. The other piece that I want to say before no, actually, I just want to dig into a text. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, and is there someone who would read this first text for us?
One of the more unusual texts in Jewish religious literature concerns a case of an infant born with two heads. That's what we were talking about. A Talmudic commentary to Menachot 37a raises the question of whether such a child is entitled to one or two shares of his father's inheritance, and notes that a similar case had been raised before Solomon.
Okay, pause for a second. So what's the setup here? What's the real question they're asking?
The real question? Someone smarter than me.
I see Lisa mouthing something.
Is that person one or two persons?
Yeah, there you go, Larry. Right, like fundamentally, are we dealing with an individual or with two people? Great. Okay, let's keep going.
Who had ruled, let them pour boiling water on the head of one child and see if the other one screams. If he does, then it means that the children are not regarded as twins, but as one.
Okay, terrible, right? Like, and we really hope, in fact, I think it's the next line or something, that we hope that this is just some crazy imagining, right? Really a terrible image when you think of it that way, but we're gonna ignore the awful reality of this kind of idea that you would pour boiling water on someone. What is their point that they're trying to make about
water poured on me?
What'd you say, Bobby?
Never mind.
What are they trying to say? What is their fundamental point? What are they?
Well, they're simply trying to differentiate the two. That if both scream, then they're the same person. But if one screams and one doesn't, then they are two separate people.
Which is to say, what is the fundamental way that they're defining whether you are one or two here?
This is really good because it goes even further. It's like, how do you, oh yeah, well, that's a title, what it means to feel each other's pain, right? Like if you feel the pain of someone not even close to you.
I think the larger question is, what is an individual? Who's an individual?
No.
I mean, Certainly, people have even asked that question about twins.
Sir?
Yeah.
Who's talking? Is it Renee or Marion? I
It was
always get
Renee.
confused. Renee?
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. Let's finish this text.
One hopes that this case was hypothetical, certainly for the sake of the child, destined to have boiling water poured on its head. Nonetheless, the late Rabbi Joseph Beyer Soloveitchik of blessed memory argued that the implications of this case are not hypothetical at all. In his essay, Kol Dodi Dolek, he writes, if boiling water is poured on the head of a Moroccan Jew, the prim and proper Jew in Paris and London must scream. And by feeling the pain, he is loyal to the nation. Whoa, great.
Okay. Putting aside the awfulness of this theoretical idea of actually pouring boiling water on someone, particularly a child, what's being said here? What is the notion that we can pull from this, whether or not we agree with it?
Well, they're saying that one Jew should feel the pain of other Jews.
Okay, that's certainly, if we're going to look at this prescriptively. Yeah, Lisa?
The suggestion is that all Jews are one community. It's a single entity, and what happens to one Jew should be felt by all Jews.
Nice. And this is, look, we find this pretty frequently, right? Where sometimes during times, actually this is maybe changed somewhat recently, though there's still some truth to it, that when Israel is under imminent threat, when there are rockets coming down, it's different, right? That's when you feel closer, particularly back in like Second Intifada era, right? When a bus, God forbid, would blow up, right? Like that feeling of connection and being there and feeling the pain. And when the JCC got bombed down in, where was it? Buenos Aires? Was it?
Right.
Kansas City.
Or in Kansas City, right? Like the sense of connection, right? When boiling water, God forbid, is poured on parts of the Jewish people, do we scream? And that's why I chose this as a starting point for tonight's discussion, because what I want to suggest is that Yom HaZikaron in particular, Israeli Memorial Day, is a day that Israelis from basically across the political spectrum scream. It's a day of immense personal and communal pain, where amongst the Israeli Jewish community, there is no one who doesn't know someone, who doesn't have a friend, who doesn't have a loved one, who doesn't have a sibling, a child, a grandchild that has died in Israel's military, right? It died as a part of Israel's wars or defending Israel in some way. And so this is a day that Israelis scream. This is not like American Memorial Day, right? This is not barbecue and beer,
No.
right? And what I want to suggest is that descriptively, it says something that American Jews, by and large, don't scream today. So I just want to start with that as an observation. I also want to say that, like, there are American Jews that scream today, right? And there are American Jews who scream in a performative way today. There are American Jews who really do feel it, and different spectrums of this, right? But by and large, I want to suggest that this is a day that Israelis scream and American Jews usually don't notice. And that says something about the nature of the relationship today. Okay, I'm going to open that up for some conversation and for some thoughts, more on that bigger, broader idea than on the specifics of the text.
Well, I guess I'm in the minority that screams.
Okay, right? Like, but Bobby, and I want you to hold on to that for a second, or hold on to that throughout this conversation, right? I think that is true about you. Like, think about some of the other Facebook posts that I see of yours, right? I think you feel that. Yeah.
I also have people who I've lost in the military in Israel.
There you go, right? And it makes a difference when you know people and love people there. Yep. Other thoughts?
Yeah. Over the last 15 years, as the American response or reaction to the Yom HaZikaron been different? Has it waned?
I think it has. That's my impression. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today is that, you know, for all of the hand-wringing that you find amongst some in the more right-wing Jewish American establishment about groups like J Street or If Not Now, or even the more radical left-wing groups, right? Like Jewish groups on Israel, the Jewish Voices for Peace, things like that. The piece that I think they often miss is that, like, actually the AIPAC folk have a lot more in common with those people than either of them do with the vast majority or the silent majority, or whatever we want to call them, of particularly younger American Jews who just don't care, right? They don't feel connected. They don't feel the pain. They don't scream because it doesn't hurt them.
Well,
Can that be,
I think
can
there's-
that be from, I was going to just, I'm sorry, Larry. I was
No,
just
you
going to
go
ask
ahead.
if, can that be from lack of education of what's going on in Israel today
Totally.
here in American Jews?
Well, I think it also has is a response to realizing that the myths that we were taught when I was younger about the formation of Israel and the various wars Israel faced are not so true, and that Israel has done some of their own provocation and has participated in ethnic cleansing and has treated Palestinians very badly and continues to do so.
Both
So-
sides.
That's a great transition to the next topic that I want to talk about, which is, I just want to raise a teaching from sort of really one of my great teachers, Rabbi David Hartman of a blessed memory, though I only knew him personally in a very small way. My time in his sort of learning institute that he created was very formative for me. He has, yeah, he died the second year of my fellowship, something like that. Yeah.
He must have been very young.
David Hartman, no, he was older.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
80s, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a young lady.
Yeah. So David Hartman has this seminal essay in 1982, I think. I'd encourage people to Google it, called Auschwitz or Sinai. Just a show of hands, has anyone read it? Really, it's short, it's great. Highly encourage you to read it. He's talking about Israel post-Lebanon war, but he may as well be talking about American Jewry today too. And what he does is he talks about, he's an ethicist. He talks about the ethics of being in Auschwitz and the ethics of being at Sinai. And he compares what are the ethical obligations that arise from both. His point with Auschwitz is that when you're in Auschwitz, when you're in a moment of true existential peril, the only ethical response, he bases this on secular ethics and also on Jewish ethics. He comes out of a very observant Orthodox community. That the only possible ethical response is survival. That's what you do when you're in Auschwitz, is you survive. Right. And that's the most important thing. And you close ranks because what you got to do is you've got to survive. Sinai, on the other hand, for him, Sinai is this moment of possibility that speaks to like the aspirational world that Jews seek to create, right? What the world should look like is what Sinai represents for David Hartman. And so the idea of Sinai is that the ethics of power, when you have it, demand a lot more of you than just survival. In fact, survival is not an acceptable response to a moment of being at Sinai, a moment of having power. And the essay goes on, it doesn't quite say this because it was written in 82, but it says the 1982 version of this, of saying that like, if our ancestors, and I just mean immediate ancestors, great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents, were to look at our world and see that for all of its problems, 3/9 of the Supreme Court are Jewish and whatever 15% of Congress are Jewish, and that there is a Jewish state for all of its problems, and God knows there are problems, that is not going anywhere, that has a strong military, that's a nuclear power, that's so on, right? Like they would look at us and they would say, oh, you're living in the Messianic world. And to me, that is as obvious as it can be that we are living at a moment of Sinai. And yet almost all of the narrative lenses we have surrounding Israel are lenses of Auschwitz,
Yeah.
right? They are almost entirely lenses of existential danger. The Iran deal, right? Think about the way that was talked about. Bibi with his red line, right? Think about, and it doesn't matter left or right, by the way, on this. Think about the way that left-wingers talk about the occupation and how it's going to destroy Israel, or think about the way that right-wingers talk about not having the occupation and how it will destroy Israel. Or think about the way that we have to circle and close ranks and we can't have disagreement in America because Israel is always facing rockets and like we just have to support the Israeli government. All of these are because the lenses that we have, this is David Hartman's theory and I totally buy it, are lenses of existential crisis. And the reality is we live at a moment of Sinai, not at a moment of Auschwitz, even today, even at this moment right now. So we're going to go into a text study now. I didn't mean to have like such a narrative sermon there, but I really wanted to just sort of present that text. It's a long one. I want to open this idea up for discussion though, because I think it's a big idea and it's going to frame a lot of what we're going to talk about for the rest of today. So thoughts on that?
Well, I have a hard time regarding Israel separate from its current political situation. And, I just, read an article in The Light today about how Bibi Netanyahu is going to be prime minister for the next 18 months. And I just was going like, oh, I don't know. I just get very frustrated. So, I know there's this, the survival question. And then there's this question of making, moral choices, smart political choices. I don't know. I get very frustrated. And I've talked to Israelis who live here but have been back there. And somebody whose name I'm not going to share said they've all drunk the Kool-Aid. That's the phrase that this person used. So I gather that, nobody is asking me to vacate my house that I think I worked hard for. And nobody is personally threatening me with my survival. No human is threatening violence, in other words. So it's so easy for me to sit back and pass judgment. And yet I can't refrain from having an opinion. And I feel more and more remote from an Israel that makes the political choices it seems to make.
Totally. I totally resonate with that personally. That's actually exactly where we're going next in this conversation. So that was the perfect segue there. Yeah, I very much resonate with that. I don't know about you. I actually have found it easier to be, I have found that issue to be easier for me in the era of Trump, because like,
Okay.
my government's awful too. And the government, like my whole life, I've had awful governments, except for like 8 years of Barack Obama and sort of the Clinton era.
Yeah.
W and the Iraq War and like our evils are worse than their evils. I don't know. That helps me sometimes. But that's not really where we're going with this conversation. Where we're going is really what Renee was actually talking about. Which is what does relationship look like? So first, I just want to look at this text quickly, because I think it's easy to think of our moment today as a moment of deep division and separation between the Jewish communities of Israel and the Jewish communities of North America, or increasing sort of disagreement and separation. And I think part of that is we are romanticizing the past. So I want to look at a text from the past here. So will someone, I'm going to interrupt you pretty quickly, but will someone read Two Communities in Relationship?
In fact, in 1950, two Israeli and American Jewish leaders, Ben Gurion and Jacob Blaustein, even
Okay, pause. Who was Ben Gurion?
The original prime minister.
Great. And
one of the founders of the modern state of Israel.
great. The longest serving prime minister in Israeli history until
Bill,
Bibi.
Netanyahu.
Bibi.
Yeah.
So who was Jacob Blaustein? Anyone know that name?
No.
Yeah.
No one?
I've heard of
I know.
wasn't he like a wealthy Jewish American who was involved in like establishing Israel or sending people to that land back in that time?
So not the last piece.
Okay.
What he in fact, that's going to be part of the disagreement here. You'll see.
Blaustein was one of the American Zionists who believed that to be a Zionist, you could still live in the diaspora.
That's one way of saying it. Yeah. We're going to get a little deeper into that in a second. But he is, I believe he's the president, maybe the first president of the, I'm going to butcher the name of this, the Council of American Presidents of Jewish institutions. It's not anything like that, but it's exactly like that. The title is just like it. The president of all the major Jewish institutions sits on a organization that. So this organization was created by Eisenhower at Eisenhower's request. Eisenhower wanted someone who spoke for the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So Blaustein, can you imagine a moment, by the way, today, where someone could speak for the Jews in America and that would have anything like a consensus, right? Who could speak for the Jews of St. Louis? I mean,
Susan.
Who could even speak for the Jews of CRC?
Right? Right?
You know,
Yeah. I was telling someone the other day, a rabbinic colleague, there are 5 of us, and I think there's very little we agree on Jewishly. It's really, it's nice. Yeah. It actually really is nice.
But that's an American concept though, because America tends to reduce all of its minority people down to having a select representative that is chosen to speak on behalf of that entire community.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Thank you. By the way, to connect this session with the session we had on Talmud before, the same thing is true of rabbinic authority, that it turns out that rabbinic authority only began to emerge once the Romans needed a representative for the Jews, like they had the church bishops for dealing with the Christians.
Oh.
And so it's actually the Romans who end up giving the power and authority to the rabbis that then trickles down. So anyways, a little random here, but exactly what Juan was saying, the same dynamic that you have, right? Okay, so this guy, basically what we've got is we've got the head of the Jews of Israel and we've got the head of the Jews of America having a conversation in 1950.
Okay. Ben-Gurion promised to mitigate his rhetoric of Aliyah and negation of the exile in exchange for the support of the American Jewish community.
Okay, what is rhetoric of Aliyah and negation of the exile? Does anyone, those are loaded terms here.
But that all Jews should come to Israel, and there should be no more diaspora.
Exactly.
Nice. So we often don't think of it this way, but American Jewry is the failure of Zionism.
Oh.
Right? In the sense that Zionism, I'm sure I'm being way overly reductionist here, but in the sense that Zionism in its classical form espoused that there was no place that American Jews could ever be at home other than in Israel, right? And the reality is, for 60 years now, American Jews have been able to, 70 years now, been able to hop on a plane and move to Israel if they want. And the reality is, as much as Israel would like them to, like us to, we basically, by and large, said, no, we're at home here and we're happy to stay here. Though Canada sounds like an appealing option many days. So all of this is to say that, negation of the exile is the Zionist idea that there is no meaningful Jewish life in the exile. It does not exist and cannot exist, and there is no ultimately safe or sustainable Jewish life in the exile.
And you know, Jimmy, this isn't just a modern discussion between Israelis and Americans. I mean, when Ben Gurion was still living in Plonsk in Poland, which was controlled by Russia then, he was having the same discussion with the Jewish community in Plonsk, and most of them decided to remain in Plonsk, which is why so many ended up being killed during the Holocaust, because they all made the same decisions, you know, and so this argument or discussion has been going on time infinitum. Even from the Babylonian exile, many Jews decided to remain in Babylonia. Thus, you had the ancient Jewish communities in Iraq and Iran, which were quite large until recently.
Baghdad was a third Jewish in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Third.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, let's go back to this text.
Hey, Daniel?
Yeah.
There's also another phenomena here of a lot of Israelis at this point have left Israel and are finding their homes either in the United States or some European countries.
Yes. Yes.
Not that many.
Was this about the time when Israel also was breaking away from Russia with their control back in 45 and
so this is this is 1950. This is absolutely at a time period when like it's still not entirely clear what the relationship's going to be between the Jews and or the Jewish state in America, and how that's going to play out in the geopolitics between America and the USSR. I just noticed, by the way, this was 1950, so this must have been before he became the head of the Council of American whatever, because that was created at Eisenhower. And this still would have been Truman in 50, right?
Yep. Yeah. Truman, 50.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and finish this text right here. Someone want to finish it?
Given the historical circumstances, the decision to suppress prickly differences made sense at the time. After decades of tremendous dislocation, demographic transformation of the global Jewish community, and unprecedented persecution, both Jewish communities had a vested interest in focusing on bolstering their own situations rather than debating their ideological and practical differences.
All of which is to say that this is not the first moment in Jewish or American Jewish and Israeli history, even in the last 70 years, when it's been pretty clear that like at some level we're both willing to say, okay, let's agree to disagree and go our own way in some profound senses. Okay. So I want to take all of this as a jumping off point for a conversation of where do we start with a relationship today? Today is this moment of Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, this moment when, without question, Israelis, Jewish Israelis are screaming out and are celebrating. And in America, today in particular, it's barely barely a whisper in many quadrants. So we have a model for a different starting point of relationship. And I want to suggest that that model begins with recognizing that what we have thought of up to this point in American Jewish history as being the nature of Jewish identity is not the same thing as what Jewish identity was 150 years ago, or 150 years before that, or 150 years before that. So I want to go back to maybe the earliest model that we have. And I want to go ahead and dig into it here. So will someone read right here, peoplehood as a starting point? And this is literally just about the earliest model that we can have, because it is Genesis chapter 12. And what's happening in Genesis chapter 12? Does anyone know? Can anyone situate us?
Is that Lech Lecha?
Lech Lecha, good. Which is what? What does that mean? What's happening?
Go forth, leave the country that you were born in, your father's house, and to, God's going to show you a place that will be yours.
What's happening at the very end of Genesis 11? Does anyone know?
Okay.
So let me say it this way.
Was it the Tower of Babel?
So what we've got are all these stories of the creation of the world and the distribution of the world. And then from Genesis chapter 12 through the rest of the Torah, what we've got is the story of the Jewish people. So this is literally the very beginning of the story of the Jewish people. The first 11 chapters are the story of the world. The rest of it's the story of the Jews. And so this is the first statement that exists about the nature of Jewishness. So will someone go ahead and read this for us?
Take it,
Now
Renee.
the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you.
Paul, could you
great-
speak closer, louder?
Yeah, it's hard to hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Okay, so what do we see immediately at this very foundational moment about the nature of Jewishness?
A unique relationship with God.
Okay. What else do we see?
We're not born into a homeland. We will be shown one, but we are going from other places to get there.
Okay, people who
Not identified with where we were initially situated or where Abram was. And so we've been wandering.
nice. Okay. Well,
Is that Helene?
Also, a little bit of revenge here. Not revenge, but I will protect you. And if not, we'll just fight it.
that's that special relationship. Yep. So how does one become a part of this community?
Hey,
Well, it seems like you have to be born into it.
Even more narrow. Keep going. How do you
You have to be a descendant of Abram.
you got to be at this point? You just got to be Abraham, Avram.
Okay.
Right? He's the only one in this club at this point, right? There are more people who are gonna end up in the club, but at its very earliest moments, what is the nature of Jewish identity? It's tribal.
one.
It's familial.
Familiar.
Right? You don't become a part of this relationship by saying, I believe in this God.
Mm.
You become a part of this relationship by being in relationship, right? By being a part of this family. And we actually know from the very earliest moments, right? Just look at who's counted amongst Abraham's family. It's not just those people he's genetically related to. It's not just those people who he's married to, right? Like this whole group of people. There are many ways of being in relationship that are familial, that are not the same as being like genetically related to each other. And so from the very earliest moments, that is the nature of Jewish identity. It is an identity that is not fundamentally about faith, though certainly there is this other component, this faith component that like weaves its way through the story, but it's about being a part of an extended family of some sort or another. Okay, any thoughts on this? So let's look at the next text then and bring it into conversation. Tzitz Eliezer, about 100-year-old text, I believe.
The case.
Okay.
The case came before me regarding a woman, the daughter of Jewish parents, who submitted a request to the courts to allow her to return to the fold of Judaism. In front of the court, she explained that she had converted to Christianity in the Anglican Church as a result of wanting to marry someone who belonged to the Anglican religion. Now she expresses complete remorse over her actions.
Okay, pause for a second. Let's talk about the setup. This is a practical question that actually happens pretty regularly. In the CCAR Rabbis Forum, there's at least once a year, twice a year, a conversation where people are asking advice on exactly a situation like this, right? Someone grows up as a Jew, goes off and becomes a part of a Christian community for 20 years after they got married to someone Christian and raises their kids, and now they're in their 70s and want to come back. Right? This happens pretty regularly. The question is, what should happen at this point? So what are our possible solutions to this? What are the possible answers?
No.
Okay,
Yes.
no is one answer. Like, you left the club, you're gone, right? Like,
That's one possible answer.
great.
And the other
What are our
possible
other
one is
possible
yes.
options? Yes, what?
Yes, you're still Jewish.
Yes, you're still Jewish. That's another answer that we've got. What's another answer?
You've got some work to do.
Yes, you can convert.
Come back.
Yeah, right? Like, go do some learning or some study or show your sincerity, and then we'll convert you. Okay. I'm going to suggest that what we're actually discussing here is what is the nature of Jewish identity, right? And has Jewish identity been violated by adopting a faith tradition like Anglicanism or Christianity of some sort, right? That's the fundamental question that's being asked. Are those a binary where you have to pick one or the other? Because certainly the way that American Jewish identity has mostly been categorized over at least the last 60 years or so has been as a corollary to Christianity, or to say it differently, as a religion. Right? You're one or the other because you are one religion or another. You can't have two faiths, right? Okay, let's go back to this text.
It is obvious and simple that according to Jewish law, a Jew is in no way capable of freeing themselves from the bonds of the Torah and severing the ties and the roots of their connection to their people. A Jew's fundamental connection to the Jewish people is founded on the fact that they were born to Jewish parents or as a /convert. It is therefore a central principle of our tradition and our holy Torah that no one of the offspring of Jacob can escape from it, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. Against their will, a Jew remains a Jew, connected to the religion of Moshe, with no recourse to free themselves from it. It is therefore simple and clear that the conversion to a different religion of this woman who wants to return to Judaism is something that never happened. She never left the framework of Judaism, neither religiously nor nationally. And her returning is like a daughter returning to her mother.
Okay, so first I want to just start by pointing out that this is not the nature of Jewish identity and for most American Jews. Most American Jews can decide, I just mean at a practical lived level, right? Most American Jews can decide that they're not Jewish anymore, and that's the end of it, right? Yeah. There's nothing essentializing about American Jews, and really for the first time in Jewish history, this is true, right? Until now, at every other place and every other time that Jews have lived, the outside world has looked at us and said, Jew, and marked us, right? Like in the way that American society marks people of color, right? There's not a choice. You can't opt out of these things in American society. And for most of Jewish history, you didn't have a choice. You couldn't opt out of being a Jew. Did that make sense? Any thoughts on that? Any?
No, that's right.
Okay, so just overtly today, you can, most American Jews. But what is the broader point that's being made by this text? What's it saying about the nature of Jewish identity?
It's intriguing.
That once a Jew,
Go ahead.
always a Jew.
Okay, that it's not about faith. It's not about like what you believe or don't believe. Go ahead and believe in Jesus. You don't actually stop being a Jew, right? You may not be popular in shul. Right. Other thoughts? Guan, were you about to say something?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of just said, but like, I guess being Jewish, whether it's by parent or conversion, is like almost like an unbreakable trust, according to this reading. And so nothing that you do, none of your actions damage that relationship, that bond. Once that bond is made, in other words, like none of your actions will ever unmake it. Even if you, I guess, consciously choose to not live as a Jew, to forsake everything about Judaism, you're still a Jew according to the thought process of the person who wrote that article.
Nice.
I view it simply like he's saying it's a tribal definition of Judaism.
Yes.
The tribe, and that's it.
Yes.
But the old jokes that we say, it's like someone goes and says, I'm an agnostic, but I'm a Jewish agnostic. I'm an atheist, but I'm a Jewish atheist. I'm a Buddhist, but I'm a Jewish Buddhist.
So, and I guess what I'm suggesting here, Bobby, is that that's not a joke that would have made sense outside of the recent American Jewish context, because outside of this context, there wouldn't have been an understanding about why those things were necessarily binaries of each other, or if they were, they would have been I continue to believe, by the way, why is it, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it illustrates this point. Why is it that by and large, American Jews don't get worked up about Jew boos, right? Jewish Buddhists, but they get real worked up about Jews for Jesus, or Jews who go off and become Messianic Jews? I don't think it's actually theological. I think what it's really about is that for most of the last 2,000 years, we've been ethnically cleansed and genocided by people who came with the symbol of the cross. And so like, it has always been a tribal violation. You are literally going off to the enemy when you became a Christian in the past, the people who are literally killing us and persecuting us. Right. And the meaning of these identities, it might be different in the United States today, but that memory, I think, is still sociological.
It's a historical response.
Yeah. Okay. Go on.
I find the absoluteness of the thought in the article a little, I guess, for lack of a better term, heavy. But I appreciate the fact that it is extended to a convert as well, that it included a convert, which to me seems like really awesome, because it has the language that you would think that it wouldn't consider a convert being bound by that same mantle. And yet, for whatever reason, everybody, convert, blood, or choice, once you make that choice, that's your, I guess, for lack of a better term, burden. That's what you carry. You know,
the cross you bear.
The cross. I almost said that, but I caught it. I stopped that. Yeah. I almost said
borrow a metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I'm sure you're hearing my dogs barking right now. Okay. So let's jump into another text. Do we want to look at a 1700-year-old version of that same idea, or do we want to skip that? I've got rabbis of the Mishnah talking about this same idea, that like fundamentally we're not about a religious tradition. It's not about a faith. We are a people and a family, not a faith. Yeah, Renee.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't hear much of this happening now, But when I was younger, I knew of any number of instances where Jewish sons and daughters married non-Jewish, specifically Christian spouses, and their family said Kaddish for them.
Right.
So,
And it's sort of, okay, maybe you can't imagine them not being Jewish, but you can imagine them being dead. It's, well, I mean, there's always been a difference of opinion about that. I mean, my mother thought that was, how could you ever say that about one of your children? How could you ever do that? And then there are people go like, well, how could you ever, betray your background, your faith?
sure.
So, but, it seems to me, especially in American life, the definition of who's a Jew and who's not a Jew is very amorphous, and it changes shape. Is
And
it?
I would suggest that it always has. That's one of the things I hope everyone takes away from this, is that don't listen to the ahistorical thinking that exists amongst many in the capital O Orthodox community that suggests that the nature of Jewish life and identity as they define it today in this very narrow way has anything to do with any other moment than today.
Okay.
Right? Like, rabbis have not always been the ones who pick who is a Jew. Even that, when you really stop to think of it, why is it that we go with the rabbinic definition of who is a Jew? Why is that any more legitimate than who shows up on Shabbos morning? Right? When you start thinking differently about Jews as a people, then our religious leaders and the rabbinic tradition can be understood as a narration and a complementary piece, but not as fundamental historical leadership. In fact, American Jewish rabbis probably are more important in their communities today than they ever have been. I mean, maybe like 30 years ago or something, but yeah. One last note on this before we go on to the next text, which is, I think it'd be really interesting at some point in the future to have a conversation about exactly this question, the Tzitz Eliezer's question, with all of the rabbis at CRC. Because without knowing this to be 100% true, it wouldn't surprise me in particular if Rabbi Susan comes down on this in a very different place than I do. She tends to see Judaism through more religious lenses, and I tend to see Judaism through almost exclusively peoplehood lenses. So just it might be interesting to have that conversation at some point. Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts here before we jump to another text? Okay, we'll do.
What was a holiday? I like that.
I know, I'm trying to, these are like children. I can't pick my favorites here, but we only have time for one more. So I guess I'll pick my favorite.
You're the rabbi.
Yeah. Okay, show of hands real quick. And if you're watching on Facebook, you don't get a vote. I'm sorry. Join Zoom next time. Who here has studied the text with me where Moses comes down and breaks the 10 Commandment tablets in a very different way?
And what, the 10 Commandments?
And breaks the 10 Commandments in a very different way than it's understood in the Torah.
Oh, break.
No one?
No.
Juan, are you saying you have?
I think maybe once I did. I'm not 100% sure, but it sounds
okay. It doesn't sound like any of us know it that well that we can't study it again then.
Let's do it. It sounds interesting.
It's a great text. It's a great text. Okay.
Is the Holid in there?
A vote to Rabbi Natan. All right, let's do this. And someone want to read for us?
Renee, read. I like to hear you read.
Oh.
Oops, sorry.
Okay,
Sorry, here we go.
Okay, Avot de Rabbi Natan, chapter 2.
This is a collection of midrash.
This is but one of the things which Moses did of his own accord. He reasoned by inference, and his judgment coincided with God's.
Okay, so what's the setup here?
That Moses is on the same wavelength as God.
Yes, but did not ask for prior approval.
Oh, okay.
right? This is not something that Moses didn't go to God asking if he could have more dessert. It just turns out after the fact that it was fine.
Okay.
You can tell what the
Oh,
conversation has been like in
yeah. Yeah, I remember this.
Okay, let's keep going.
He kept away from his wife, and his judgment coincided with God's. He kept away from the tent of meeting, and his judgment coincided with God's.
We don't care about either of these. We're not talking about those examples. We're only talking about the next one.
He broke the tables of the 10 Commandments, and his judgment coincided with God's. He broke the tables of the commandments, but he took the tables of the, does he mean tab?
Okay, hold on. Pause for a second. Sorry. Okay, does this make sense?
Yes.
Yes. So what we've learned is that when we have these two things, oops, sorry, I'm doing a replace all with the tables and the tablets.
So good.
So what we've learned is that when Moses broke the tablets of the commandment, when he broke the 10 commandments, that it turns out that this is what God wanted him to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is nowhere in the Torah, right? I just want to start by saying,
No.
so when Moses comes down in the Torah and breaks the 10 commandments, I was thinking of the Mel Brooks moment, right? 10 commandments. What's his emotional state that leads to this destruction?
He's angry.
See the golden
He's
calf.
furious.
Right? Great. If we were going to put a color on his emotion, what would it be?
Fury, anger.
Great. Red, if it was a color. Yeah, great. Okay. So I want to suggest that the crime that Moses commits is tablet destruction, 2nd degree. It's not 1st degree, right? It's not pre-planned tablet destruction. It's 2nd degree because it's in the moment, spur of the moment anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
We follow the distinction?
Yeah.
Unpremeditated.
Okay. So I want to hold on to that distinction here. I also want to hold on to how radical it is that Moses breaks the tablets of the commandment. We're so used to this as an image. So everyone knows the tradition that if the Torah drops on the ground, everyone fasts for 40 days or some version of this, right? Heard this? So I want to suggest like the image of Rabbi Susan on Yom Kippur looking out at everyone and seeing some people talking and getting so mad that she takes the Torah out of the ark and destroys the Torah on the bima because people aren't keeping the commandments. Okay? Destroys the Torah right on the bima. Like a radical idea, right? Even sort of the visual of it's hard to bear. And yet keep in mind that like what we're talking about here is within the internal telling of this, right? Moses destroying the literal 10 commandments, like made by God, not made in China, made, right? Like these literal 10 commandments. And so the level of like how radical this moment is, we don't see anymore, but I think we need to hold on to, and how Moses probably should have gotten into a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And didn't behave very well. Okay. I want to hold on to that because that's not how this midrash is going to read it. Let's keep going.
Okay. He broke the tablets of the commandments, but he took the tablets of the commandments and descended and was exceedingly glad.
Sorry. I didn't realize I was going to do that. I'm causing trouble.
Okay, that's good. When he beheld the offense which they committed in the making of the golden calf, he said to himself, how can I give them the tablets of the commandments? I shall be obligating them to major commandments and condemning them to death and the hands of heaven. For thus is it written in the commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Okay. So, well, first of all, what's Moses' emotional state here? What's happening? He's coming down and
He's pleased and happy.
okay, so first he's happy before he sees them. And then when he sees them, what happens?
I think he's afraid for them.
Okay, he's afraid.
Yeah.
He's pretty logical here, right?
Yeah.
That's true too.
I sort of imagine this is the Spock Moses here. Like
That's
if
really
we call
good.
the previous emotional life red, I call this one blue personally.
Yeah.
Like, right? Oh, I know now if I give them these tablets, then it's gonna be bad for them, so I won't do them. Instead, I will break them. Right? That's
Yeah.
not the Moses of the Torah who like comes down and is mad and destroys them in a fit.
This is like he's protective of the people.
Nice. Okay, let's keep going.
Rabbi Yossi the Galilean says, I shall tell thee a parable. To what may this be likened? To a king of flesh and blood who said to his steward, Go and betroth unto me a beautiful and pious maiden of seemly conduct. That steward went and betrothed her. And after he had betrothed her, he went and discovered that she played the harlot with another man.
Okay, pause. Pause. I just want to, this is not what we're doing with this text, but I just like don't want to read this without pointing out that this is a woman who has like had no agency in this story up to this point, right? She's entirely been acted on, and we're told that she played the harlot with another man, but we know nothing about this. Like maybe this other man has been her lover for however long. Maybe this other man is like person she wanted to marry. Maybe like we know nothing here. All we know is that the king shows up, actually the steward of the king shows up and says, Mazel tov, you're engaged.
Right.
So I just, that's not what this text is about, but I want to hold on to that here. Okay, let's keep going.
Forthwith, of his own accord, he made the following inference. Said he, if I now go ahead and give her the marriage deed, she will be liable to the penalty of death. And thus we shall have separated her from my master forever.
Did this make sense, the parallel here?
Yes.
Within the context in which it was written, yeah.
Yeah, within the context in which it was written. By the way, one of the things that's popping up here, today, a Jewish wedding actually technically has the engagement and the wedding both in the same ceremony. And the reason for that is it is forbidden for two people who are engaged to have sex until they are married. This goes back to traditions where like there would be a 3-year-old girl who would be engaged.
Ooh. Wow.
Right? Like, but she would be engaged and then her future husband would come back and marry her 15 years later or whatever it was. And so you can see why there is this prohibition on sex before marriage once you're engaged. The irony is that there is no prohibition in Judaism to sex between two people who are not engaged and not married. So that's the problematic that we're seeing here, if that sort of helps with the parallel between these two. Okay, finish the text.
So too did Moses the righteous make an inference of his own accord.
What was the inference of his own accord?
That if he gave them the 10 commandments, they'd be condemned to death.
Okay, great. So yes, but at the very beginning of this, we're told that he made an inference of his own accord that God turned out to agree with. What was that inference?
That he could break the tablets.
That he should break the 10 commandments.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And it turns out after the fact that God wanted him to do that. So go ahead and finish it.
He said, how shall I give these tablets to Israel? Oh, okay. He said, how shall I give these tablets to Israel? I shall be obligating them to major commandments and make them liable to the penalty of death. For thus is it written in the tablets, he that sacrificeth unto the gods, save unto the Lord only, shall be utterly destroyed. Rather, I shall take hold of them and break them and bring Israel back to good conduct.
Okay. So this rereading of the Moses story where Moses destroys the 10 commandments is a reading. I mean, first keep in mind that what we're told is that Moses did this without permission, and it turns out that God agreed with what Moses did. Meaning God agrees with the notion that we're not even talking about the Torah, we're talking about the literal 10 commandments in this story, that even the literal 10 commandments must be broken if the choice is between breaking them and the people. So I actually use this text pretty frequently when this was an important text to me, thinking through at a different stage in my thought process than I'm at, very different stage than today, interfaith marriage and officiating at interfaith weddings.
Yeah.
This was an important text to me for that. I know a number of Orthodox colleagues that I've studied this text with as a way of talking about the place of LGBTQ Jews, right? Like when the Torah breaks people, the Torah has to break, and that's God's will. But that's actually a homiletic turn on it, because the actual thing that they're talking about is not people like individuals. They're talking about the Jewish people, which is exactly our topic for today, right? That fundamentally the most important piece is not the religion, it is the people. It is the sense of being a part of the family. And so the starting point for relationship with Israel today, I would suggest, is, at least for me, is that 40% of the Jews in the world live in North America and 40% of the Jews in the world live in Israel, and that Israel is a state of and for the Jewish people for all of its problems. And it's not about whether I love Israel. In fact, I find that to be a deeply problematic narrative, this idea of like, do you love Israel or show your love for Israel, or right? Like, but I feel obligated to Israel because I am a Jew, and to be a Jew means to be a part of Jewish peoplehood and to be obligated by Jewish peoplehood. And if 40% of the Jews in the world have sovereignty, I'm deeply obligated to them and by them and for them and by their actions and by their good and by their bad and by they're part of the family. So all of that is to wrap up our session today with that sort of broad idea as a starting point for a new relationship, a foundation for a Sinai-based new relationship with Israel. So thoughts on this?
Hey,
Reactions?
Daniel, can you speak louder?
I can try.
He's over. I just want to thank you, Danny.
No, thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas here?
Is there a suggestion in this then, this is Helene, that the 10 Commandments should have been made with more flexibility? Because you can't live in this straight and narrow line if, you know, we have two examples here of breaking the 10 Commandments so that the people don't die.
Nice. Yeah, and there's all sorts of midrash that follows that. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, also, can I ask a quick question then?
Yeah.
With Israel, it's not really a true lover of all Jews. I mean, if you're not Orthodox, if you're not an ultra-Orthodox, you're an okay person. However, if you're Reformed, conservative, you know, you're like 50% Jewish, it seemed like.
Not
So,
even.
right, like, yeah, that's a big part of the question. Is also, do Israeli Jews see themselves as part of do they see themselves as fundamentally Jews in peoplehood with us? And do they see Israel as a nation state for the Jewish people? Or do they see themselves primarily as Israelis and Israel as a nation state or as a state for the Israeli people? And that's an incredibly important seam line and a place of interesting discussion.
I think the Orthodox rabbinate, which has extraordinary power in Israel far beyond its numbers, has built a false narrative for Israelis about the whole religious question, because, you know, like for Reform Jews, they just wipe out all the Reform Jewry.
Well, don't forget also that liberal Judaism as we know it is a response to the experience of diaspora. And it is particularly liberal Judaism that is Jewish identity surrounding like religion, with sort of religious notion at its core, is very much about fitting Jewish identity into an American-sized whole. And
yeah, I always thought it was founded by Moses Mendelssohn in Germany.
So it
Liberal
is.
Judaism.
It is, but it's also those two things are connected. And the other thing to say is that radical reform really only takes off in America. its precursors are in Germany, but radical reform as we know it, that really sort of takes as a basis the notion that we can be Germans of the Hebrew faith as opposed to Jews who live in Germany.
Right.
Or Americans of the Hebrew faith as opposed to, right, like, and it's a little different in America. Because actually what we meant was the better way of understanding that America is not that we could become Americans of the Hebrew faith, but that we could become white people of the Hebrew faith. That, like, that's the story of Ashkenazi immigration to the United States and how Judaism became a religion, or Jewish identity became a religion, is exactly that. That we could become white people of the Jewish faith rather than Jews, is the story of Ashkenazi Jewry and its immigration. Did that make sense? As sort of a wrap-up piece?
Boy, this is so open-ended. It could lead to so much more discussion. It's amazing.
Oh, Miriam's here.
Who?
Right at the end. Hello. Good to see you.
Hi, Mary.
Hey, Miriam.
Can I ask a question that goes back to what you were discussing before George blew a fuse?
That was one.
And we were talking about, you know, like, once a Jew, always a Jew, and even if you converted out of it, you were still a Jew. But they also had the word convert in the Ger convert as part of how you became a Jew. So once the mother or the father has converted to Judaism, does that automatically mean that all offspring are fully acknowledged as part of the Jewish community?
So, I mean, in this perspective here, it would only be, this is an Orthodox perspective, only be if the mother converted, right? The father's tribal identity has nothing to do with it here, only the mother's. But yeah, that's exactly what they're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like the mob. You can join, but you can never leave.
Like the Eagles, you can check in, but you can't.
Yeah, Hotel California. Yeah, exactly. Right, like that's the idea. But fundamentally, what it's saying is, right, like if you, I actually think it works. If you think of a tribe as an extended family, then just recognize that there are many ways, just descriptively again, of being in familial relationships. Certainly many families, maybe most families have some sort of genetic something, but you can marry into a family, you can be adopted into a family, you can be like aunt so-and-so of a family, even though like you have no actual relationship to that family, but you may as well be because you're invited over for Passover and Thanksgiving, and you're at the kids' birthday parties, even when they're like genetic aunts, right? Like we all have hopefully those people, and they're, in the same way, I think we find it in the Jewish community that certainly, like, look, there are Jewish ethnicities, but there have always been Jews who are not a part of those ethnicities or a part of other ethnicities. And there have always been ways of becoming Jewish that are not about being born in. Like if you look at the so-called Ashkenazi genome, I always find this interesting, right? Like the primary influencer genetically of the Ashkenazi genome comes from the Middle East, comes from Israel. The second one, the second most significant contributor, and it's pretty close, is Italy, because a huge number of Italians became Jewish. And like, did they go to a Beit Din of 3 rabbis and convert and have like, probably not, right? Like, but that's Jewish, because Jewish identity is always changing and the boundaries of it are always changing. And I want to suggest that the ish in Jewish identity is much more important than the specific halachic binary view that any particular rabbi has about who is or isn't a Jew. Okay, any last thoughts before we end it for tonight? Yeah.
No, thank you very much. That was very fascinating and a great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
We'll be counting the Omer at 8:30.